Welcome, Dr. Cherif Amir, the Professor of Geopolitical Affairs at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Amir, before we start talking about the Egyptian-Chinese relations and file as a whole, we're witnessing the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry participating in the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, the summit that is really preceding the COP28 that will be hosted by the UAE this year. Now, obviously, we are experts now after hosting COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last November, and we know the amount of works and the preparatory work that goes a whole year before hosting such an important summit dealing with climate change. Now, how important is it now that Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, who was president of the COP27, goes and lends an experienced lending hand to the UAE, giving them not just the outcomes of COP27, but also the experiences and what needs to be built on during COP28 as a result of the outcomes of COP27?
Well, it's obvious that, as you said, we have gained experience, and we made a huge surprise to the world because everyone didn't expect that we could really be at that level. And we have seen they tried to underestimate what some of the Western forces, our work during that time, and we passed the test. So I think that the same thing would be taking place in the United Arab Emirates. They will try to make some critics to the country there. So I think that the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry is giving now the opportunity to our brothers in the Emirates to explain how some topics, which are environmental topics in appearance, but then it has some political agenda inside. Maybe one of the agendas that will be used as the oil, that it pollutes the environment. So this is targeting the economy of the Gulf states. So they have to be prepared in a way or another how to answer this about the green economy and the green energy and how they will deal with that. So I think that there is this coordination between the Egyptian diplomacy and the Emirati diplomacy about how to contain all that. We still are the president of the COP27 till the handling of the new session for the Emirates. So this is a coordination. In a way, it's the presence of Egypt as the hosting country, the former hosting country until the COP28. And the second part is the coordination between, bilateral coordination between Egypt and the Emirates on, as I said, what is hidden as political agenda under the cover of these summits.
Yes. Well, talking about the bilateral relations now between Egypt and China now, yesterday, Egypt and the President Sisi with the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry received the Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang, which is the first visit by Qin Gang to Egypt as soon as he assumed office in China. Now, before we start talking about this summit and what's being dealt within the agenda of this meeting. Now, Egypt has historical relations with China. Egypt is considered the first Arab and African country to recognize the People's Republic of China. Ever since this sort of recognition by Egypt to the Republic of China, how would you assume the progress of the relationship between both countries of great cultures and civilizations?
First of all, the Chinese Revolution took place in 1949, and then in a couple of years, in the 1950s, Egypt recognized the Chinese Republic. We were the first, yes, in the world, not only in the Arab world. I think that we as Egyptians and the Chinese, we share a lot about our historical civilization, our history. We didn't have many things in common, but events showed that we were the victims maybe of many of the conspiracies around the world against the two nations. Many forces do not wish to see China growing. Same thing for Egypt. Many forces do not wish to see us growing. And I think culturally we are close in a way that we understand that there has to be a power for the East. And as Samuel Huntington said it in The Clash of Civilization, he's a Western philosopher, and he said the East is based about the Arab world and the Chinese and the Hindus and Russia. So I think that this means that we are two powers, main powers, in the East. Geographically, we are not united, but still, we are each in its region a leader. We are the leader of the Arab world, and historically, in civilization, maybe economically, we're not exactly as China. Maybe economically, Japan and South Korea are doing very well, but still, China is China. It's a huge civilization. So we share this heritage of our ancestors. The second thing is that we have to work together now. It's time to do it.
Yes. Well, when we talk about the foreign minister, the Chinese foreign minister meeting the Egyptian foreign minister and the president as well, now we're not just talking about the foreign minister of a country in the East, in Asia. We're talking about the foreign minister of the second biggest economy in the world after the United States. That's an economy that is even stronger than the European economies. I mean, the second biggest in the world. What sort of topics and what sort of issues would be discussed between the president, the foreign minister, and the Chinese foreign minister?
Well, we have many topics now. As you said, this is the second biggest economy. We know that the United States has a huge economic debt to China. We know that China approached the Middle East now, and we have seen the summit of the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia with all the Arab leaders. And the fact that the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China, one of his main visits, as you said, he just took in charge his position. The first of his trips is Egypt. That means that something's urgent on the agenda of the Chinese diplomacy towards the Middle East. He's stressing this kind of wish of the Egyptian leadership to work with everyone. We still have the sector of the Suez Canal, and we have seen today the president, he spoke about this with the prime minister here in Egypt about developing this economic zone. And the Chinese are very interested in doing that. So there is this approach between Egypt and China. It's a critical situation, actually. Maybe it's more critical for us because we are in the middle between the West and the East, and we are under pressure for many reasons, especially the war between Russia and Ukraine. So we have to work with everyone to ensure that we would not sustain all the pressure from one side. We could have any supplies from China if any of our Western friends and partners would try to blackmail at any time our decisions. So this is a way of finding a breakthrough. This is very, very smart to do. And if we would work with the Chinese now, we're giving the signal also to our friends in Europe and in the United States that we have an independent decision process. Of course, economically, we are closer to the West, but this is a signal also that we could work together with the Chinese at any time to find alternative solutions. We would not be bound to one camp. The fact that President Sisi met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China is to, first of all, send to Jinping, the president of China, the message that the Egyptian leadership is taking very seriously this file of cooperation, that we're working on it, that we are doing our best now to implement these decisions that we are taking. And I think that this visit, because the Chinese always have their interests and their business first, so the fact that they come to Egypt, that means that they have found a solid ally that they could count upon.
Yes. Well, China becoming the second biggest economy in the world is not an easy thing. And they mean business. And we've seen quite recently that they actually signed a contract with Qatar, a gas contract, a 27-year contract, the biggest of its kind, just making sure that they are getting enough gas for 27 years. And you've mentioned the emphasis on having Egypt as a gateway for their products and their trade to the rest of Africa with the Suez Canal economic zone, the Chinese economic zone as well. And the president today emphasized the importance of speeding up the process and making everything accessible and feasible for the Chinese investments. There's also the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a project that has been talked about for a few years now. Do you feel that all these talks and all these memorandums of intentions and understanding are coming to fruition, and we will be witnessing at a time of very critical economic crises happening all around the world, that the Chinese are here to make business and to have these businesses and investments take place now?
Of course, we are in a situation actually, especially Egypt, which is very critical because we were in the mid of our economic process, and then we were hit by the COVID-19, then by the war in Russia and Ukraine, and also a heritage of several difficulties inside Egypt, like bureaucracy and corruption that we are trying to fight by any means now. It's a new Egypt, it's a new republic, and it won't be done in a day. It will take time and effort. So the smart thing to do is to find economic alliance with other powers. We have relations with the United States, relations with the IMF, and we have seen that we are suffering because of some conditions. The smart leadership, like here in Egypt, is trying to find other solutions. We won't continue in some one track. We're trying to find other tracks. One of these tracks are the economic relations with other powers like China. And as you said, yes, the Chinese, they mean business. They want to find other places for the market and for cooperation. Because we all know that the Chinese also are under pressure from the United States. The Western media is trying to always portray China as a dictatorship, as a country who is against human rights. And we suffered from the same thing at a certain time. They were criticizing us. So we understand now that we have to be close as the two nations, because both Cairo and Beijing, we all know that the IMF, the economic conditions in the world are directed by some forces, and they want to just corner us so we would not go abroad. So if we work hand in hand, I think that at a certain time we won't be needing, not immediately of course, loans. We won't be needing any of the help from the 100% help from the West. We will be now assisted by China, Russia, and other powers elsewhere than Europe and the United States, which does not mean that we are separating ourselves from our friends, underline our friends and partners in the West.
Yes. Well, you've mentioned the Chinese Arab summit that took place in Riyadh, and we are witnessing, or we witnessed the meeting between the Chinese foreign minister with our foreign minister and president, and it is probably preceding maybe other meetings and other summits that will be taking place between Egypt and China later on. But those two meetings, what are the differences in dynamics between the Arab-Chinese summit that took place in Riyadh and the summit and the meeting that took place in Egypt? Are they different in nature? Are they complementary to each other? Could they constitute any sort of conflict of interest, for instance, economically at least, between China? I mean, China is trying to really work on the GCC countries, and also Egypt being the gateway and leader of the African continent. Now, how are they working together? How are they complementing each other, these relations with China and our relations with China?
I think it's complementary because of the fact that, all our respects to our brothers in the Gulf states, but Egypt is the only military power which has its own military capable of implementing its own self-defense. Even our brothers in the Emirates, they count on our help in that matter. So I think that we have the military capability, and the Chinese want to export their arms to countries who would know how to use it. And also, let's not forget something very interesting for the Chinese. At a certain time, they suffered from the pirates at the end of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. Who's present now to protect this gateway? It's Egypt, the Egyptian Navy, which is one of the best in the world. The Israelis even said that it's a superb navy. So we are there. So they have the interest to work with us because our military is present in the Red Sea. We have worked also with the Chinese to help the Sudanese military have some weapons and arms from China. At the time, there was this embargo and still on Sudan. So we are opening other gates for them. I think that the military aspect is very important. The geographical situation of Egypt is highly important for the Chinese, with the Suez Canal, with our military presence in Bab el-Mandeb Strait. We are there as, let's not say call it the policeman of this region, but with still the guarantees of this economic relationship between China and the whole Arab world. For instance, China has this close relationship with Turkey, for example, which is in NATO, because they don't trust NATO, and they know that NATO is a hostile organization for them as they are for Russia. The same thing for the Chinese. They wish to see other replacement for other powers in the Middle East. They have troubled relationship with Israel. We have seen when the Minister of Security, Internal Security in Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, went to the Temple Mount. There was two nations in the Security Council of the United Nations. It was China, the permanent member, and the Emirates, who's a temporary member, who presented the case and criticized the Israeli action. So the Israeli diplomacy and the Chinese diplomacy are not getting along. So concerning, I'm detailing the military forces in the region. So with the Turks, they're not really friendly. They're not really friendly with the Israelis. The remaining force is Egypt, and they count on us because we have this let's say, military equipment from the West and Russia, and why not also China?
Yes. Well, talking about the West now, we've seen tensions running high between China and the number one, China, the second biggest economy, and the biggest economy, the USA, and we've seen these highs, reaching these highs, especially during the Donald Trump administration. How are these tensions now, and how does it reflect on Egypt strengthening its economic and political relations with China?
Well, of course, the Biden administration is not like the previous administrations. It's a bit weak, of course. And for instance, the Trump administration was totally hostile to China. And all the allies of Washington at that time couldn't really approach Beijing or even, let's say, the Great Wall of China because of the Trump administration. And China also was very, very squeezed at that time. They couldn't be present in the waters and the strait towards Taiwan. Now they're present. Now they can come to the Middle East. Now they can gather the rich oil countries. Now they can contact Egypt. And so I think that the Americans now, it's the continuity of losing some of their control in the Middle East. And the example is the visit of Joe Biden, US President, to Riyadh, and he met all the Arab leaders. The next day, his plane, Air Force One, just left Riyadh, and the next day, Xi Jinping was there with the same leaders on the same table. And it was a clear message to the United States that you're not the only boss here. So I think that the Americans will study really these relations between the major allies in the region, which is the Gulf states and China, and Egypt and China. And every case is separate. As you said, Qatar signed this contract. They're signing same contracts with the Emirates, with Saudi Arabia, and now Egypt. And what is more dangerous for the Americans, that it will be also military contracts with Egypt.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, the Egyptian-Chinese relations are quite historic, and there's a very strong and bright future for these relations. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.